In the early 90s, Shigeru Miyamoto thought of the idea of a 3D Super Mario game. He originally had the idea during the prime time of the SNES, but eventually decided to rethink that idea and decided to try it on the Nintendo 64, which in comparison was not only more powerful, but the controller had far more buttons and also included an analog stick, which would help fuel the full effect of 3D movement more than a 4-directional input pad. The production of the game began on September 7th, 1994 and was finished by May 20th, 1996, thus having released the first 3D Super Mario game. Super Mario 64 was a huge revolution. I'm sure if you've seen a Super Mario 64 review then you've probably heard that already. I do happen to agree with this statement, and while Super Mario 64 is a game I love to death, it simply was just a product of its time. A lot of things to do with this game are simply taken for granted now, but at the time there were things that we hadn't really seen before, as so many games which were 3D at this point commonly had tank controls or fixed camera angles, which I'm still not a huge fan of. But Shigeru Miyamoto changed this standard by creating a camera that could be controlled, which is still incredibly impressive, and as of now this has made the standard. The classic Super Mario way to kill enemies is by jumping on their head, which, whilst clever in 2D space, the idea would just be tedious and get rather boring after a while in a 3D space. Nintendo knew this, and instead of just Mario's basic jump mechanic, we also get a kick and punch, which can both be used with a button press. You can jump on Goombas or punch them now, but as well as this, there are enemies in Super Mario 64 which can't be jumped on to kill. Take King Bomb-omb for example. You are required to run up behind him, press B to pick him up, then throw him on the ground. Rinse and repeat and you beat him. This is a nice and refreshing new way to introduce new attacks into the Super Mario franchise, and these attacks stuck, as they were Mario's neutral attack in Super Smash Bros. The mobility in Mario 64 is brilliant. There are so many different types of jump, examples being the long jump, triple jump, backflip, and the wall jump. The wall jump, however, I find to be quite hard to pull off, as there isn't really a clear indication as of when to pull it off. There was in Super Mario 64 DS, however, and even in games like Super Metroid, for example. However, I believe this was the first Mario game with the wall jump mechanic, so I'll let it slide. As well as jumping, attacks are also used as part of the mobility, as the dive will get you more distance than a regular jump. The only slight issue with this is you'd need to be careful with where you execute this move, as the only way to cancel it is by rolling out or sliding. In most ways, these moves are inventive or fun to pull off, which with Mario being solely based on platforming, there isn't really any better match. The controls for Mario in this game aren't also perfect. In my opinion, the wing cap in Super Mario 64 is an area I commonly find myself struggling to execute efficiently, as they require practically impossible control in order to acquire the floating 8 red coins in one of the castle's secret stars. Once this level is complete, however, the power-up isn't used for any more super tight focused turns. It becomes far easier as the main issue is the pit or sinking sand beneath you. The wing cap is the only cap in the game that has a different control scheme. The metal and vanish cap use the basic controls like Mario does. Metal Mario is used to sink underwater and the vanish cap is used to go through certain walls. The caps in Super Mario 64 are a nice addition and in turn require you to do some backtracking. A star in Jolly Roger Bay has a jet stream which the current forces you out of it when you get too close. But once we get Metal Cap Mario's ability we can retry and the jet stream no longer affects us. This is something that when the player comes back to this, they feel a sense of accomplishment, and these are satisfying stars to collect. The controls are far better for the original Super Mario 64 in comparison to the DS remake, as Super Mario 64 has analog control whilst the DS version is played with the D-pad, and even when playing on the 3DS the analog control still isn't implemented correctly, so the control doesn't appear to play with true analog control, lacking the precision that the Nintendo 64 controller has, simply because it only has 8 directional movement. The camera in Super Mario 64 is okay. At times you can't see what you're doing, and since the Nintendo 64 controller isn't dual analog, you can only use the camera to a limited degree. This is as there are 4 buttons which are used to change the camera location, but even with this, pressing C up and releasing it doesn't allow the camera to view in front. Sometimes it will just mess around with the camera, automatically making it hard to see what's ahead or what enemies will come up. These are only the negatives though. The camera a lot of the time has a great default camera location and it tends to recenter the focus on Mario and what is ahead of him. But that doesn't change the fact that a lot of the screen could eventually get blocked up by a ledge that blocks our view in the foreground. On startup, we are presented with a huge Super Mario head as well as Charles Martinet's Super Mario video game debut. Mario's face here is still nicely detailed. I used to spend a lot of time just messing around with Mario's face, funnily enough. After this screen we are greeted with one of the most basic but greatest file select screens ever. The music here is great, Mario's glove being the cursor is clever, the options are easy to access and don't blend in with the background, as well as there are 4 save files. Upon selecting a file, we see a letter, which says Princess Peach invites us over to eat some cake, and boom, there's the story. The beginning of Super Mario 64 in comparison to previous 2D Mario games is incredibly different. In the 2D games you start the game, select a level, and boom, you're in the level. No time for you to get used to the controls, you're just on your way. But in Super Mario 64 you have a peaceful starting environment in which you can get used to the 3D space and all the new controls for Mario, like diving, triple jumping and even wall jumping. It can all be tested out in this area. You go at your own pace, and when you're ready to progress, go ahead and progress. The central hub in Super Mario 64 is Peach's castle. This area links all levels, Bowser's fights and secret levels together. The music here is peaceful in order to let the player know that they're in no particular danger here, and the doors in this area are painted with stars on them to signify how many stars are required in order to pass through that door. The stars in Mario 64 are the main collectibles. The levels are home to the stars, and the levels are in form of paintings. Incredibly original, and I don't know if any other game has ever done this. In each stage there are 7 stars. Each star is a hint as to what the star is related to, like the 8 red coin stars, you are required to collect 8 red coins. The stages tend to have level transformations as you progress through the missions. Examples of this are Womp's Fortress and bomb-omb Battlefield. Both first missions need you climbing to the top of that level in order to have a mini boss fight, but the second level, that boss is no longer there and a new event is taking place. In Womp's Fortress, a tower has been built in place of it, and bomb-omb Battlefield turns into a racetrack goal. The 7th star in each stage is always a 100 coin star. It's a secret star which isn't on the mission select screen. But when you collect 100 coins, a star will appear, and for the first time in the game, you find out that you can actually stay in the level upon collecting the star. Yet, when collecting a normal mission's star, it kicks you out of the stage, which is rather annoying actually, since a lot of the time it isn't necessary. 100 coin stars are fine, all the levels have a rather accessible amount of coins to collect. However, Tall Mountain and Cool Mountain are made the hardest since the slide is required to gather the 100 coins, which this means the coin star can find itself on the slide, making it hard, if even possible, to get the star. And if you die you have to start it all over again with no coins. Levels in Super Mario 64 are non-linear, minus the Bowser levels. You aren't required to collect any star in any significant order. In fact, on bomb-omb Battlefield you can get the final star without having even gotten the first one yet. My only problem with that, like in the Galaxy games, is you don't quite know what other stars there are left to get or what the hint of the star is. You can only see what the leftmost hidden star's hint is, which I find a minor annoyance. Whilst being non-linear, the level design is also incredibly solid. I don't really see any issues with the levels besides the 5 hidden location stars, which I personally think are quite lazy. The levels are designed as a sandbox in which you can do anything you want. It isn't really necessary to collect the stars to have fun, and the environments in this game are very enjoyable to just roam around. The mini bosses in Super Mario 64 are very enjoyable, and tend to be a refresher from the main gameplay, which is just platforming or Bowser fights. They are all different and unique with very cool designs. This however can't really be said for the Bowser fights. The Bowser fights are just the same boss fight. Each time you fight him, the only difference being the background and Bowser's health, which in the first 2, he takes 1 hit, but the final fight he takes 3 hits. It's also difficult to land Bowser on a spike. Revisiting this game for the review, I never expected that the hardest part of the Bowser level would be this. It's something I can remember never particularly struggling with, but I guess I just suck now. Power stars are collected through these stages, and like I mentioned previously, they are used in order to open up other areas, but it isn't necessary to open up that many. You only need 70 out of 120 to be able to beat Bowser. The traditional Mario games, in order to skip levels, it was going through warp pipes. This game's equivalent is simply through skipping levels by decision instead of by secret. The music and sounds all embed themselves perfectly within Super Mario 64. The soundtrack is by far one of the greatest Mario soundtracks. It's impossible to imagine any of these stages in the games without the stage's own theme. That's how iconic and standout these themes are, and of course, like I've covered in quite a few of my other reviews, the person who composed the music for this game is none other than Koji Kondo. The graphics in Super Mario 64 don't hold up to today's standards, not in the slightest, but for the time they were made they were great. But advancements in technology were made so abruptly to the point to even when the GameCube came out, these graphical limitations became far outdated in comparison. One quick thing to note is how things change at distance. The rendering distance often gives things away that are very distant, but then they'll suddenly pop out of existence because the thing it's meant to be behind shortly appears after. Just like the underwater Jolly Roger Bay red coin. As well as when Mario is far away from the camera, his normal character model gets switched to the non-polished, low-poly model, which is quite the eyesore. The last few negatives I'll briefly explain are the invisible walls, which there appear to be plenty and are rather irritating to run into, as well as you can only leave a level if you're fully stationary, as whilst you are airborne or swimming, you cannot exit a level, as it doesn't give you the option, which is a ridiculous feature. I'm sure everyone who loves Mario 64 has disliked this video and gone by this point, but whilst I have noted quite a drastic amount of negatives, I very much love Mario 64. It is one of my favourite 3D Mario games and is still a very enjoyable game and is worth playing today. However, I understand that a Nintendo 64 and a cartridge of Mario 64 aren't too easy to get for cheap, so the best option I would argue is the PC port. It has the option to change controls, it has a cheat menu, far more graphically up to date, and also is capped to 60 FPS for a smoother experience. But my final rating for Super Mario 64 is a 9 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and thanks for the support recently, it's been amazing. Super Mario World is next, so if you get offended by my silly opinion, you can get offended just a little bit more when that comes out. Okay, bye.